Welcome to our first Edpuzzle video. Today we're going to be looking at absolute value equations. Hopefully this is a refresher, or if this is something new to you, hopefully you can kind of follow along and pick up with how to solve absolute value equations. So to recall, absolute values tell you the distance from 0. So for example, if you had the absolute value of 3, well, if you just count, it's 1, 2, 3 away from the 0. The absolute value of 5, well, if you look, it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 away from 0. The absolute value of negative 2, well, it's just 1, 2 away from 0. So just to kind of make sure, what would the absolute value of negative 3 be? Well, if you gave it a try, you should see it's just 3 away from 0. So one thing to notice from absolute values is that no matter what the sign is, you're always going to have a positive answer because you can't have a negative distance. Here's a question to kind of get us thinking about before we get into our equations. What absolute value of x could give you a value of 2? So think about this. If you look at the number line, like what are numbers that are 2 away from 0? Well, there's actually more than one. There would be one that's 2 to the right, positive 2 would be, its absolute value would equal 2, and the absolute value of negative 2 would also equal 2. So if we had something like this, there's actually 2 solutions. And we're going to see that when we look at equations today, there's often one or more solutions, usually 2, unless we'll see some special cases where we can get a false positive. But keep in mind, when you have absolute values, since there's really 2 sides of 0, usually there's 2 solutions that make an equation true. All right, so let's dive into a few examples. So the first equation we're looking at, we have the absolute value of x minus 3 equals 5. So the first thing you want to do is, well, remember, you're just trying to find a number that's absolute value equals 5. I mean, we're just trying to figure what would make this give us an absolute value of 5. So we really want to figure out what would make that equal, because the absolute value of 5 is 5, and we know the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. So we really want to figure out what would make this inside part equal positive 5, or what would make this inside part equal negative 5. Or really, in other words, when you have an absolute value equation, you split it up, you set the inside equal to the positive of what it equals, and you set it equal to the negative of this right-hand side. So once you've got these two equations, you're just going to solve them and get your answers. So you would get x equals 8, and you would get x equals negative 2. For our second example, you want to be careful if you've got extra junk around your absolute value. You want to get the absolute value part by itself first. So this 2 in front is really 2 times this absolute value. You can't distribute because it's not parentheses, so don't try and distribute or anything like that. But to get rid of this 2, we would just divide it to both sides. So I would have the absolute value of x plus 3 equals 5. Now this is similar to the problem we saw before. Since this is isolated, we could just split this apart. So sorry, it'd be x plus 3 equals 5, x plus 3 equals negative 5, and we would just solve these two equations. So we would get x equals 2, and we would get x equals negative 8. Just like any other equation though, if you want to check your answers, if you plug this in, you would have, like you could plug it into here or down even here, potentially, but usually want to plug in the original. So like for example, if I plugged in 2, I would have this, and you would see that 2 times the absolute value of 5 would equal 10. That is true. So you can always plug in your answers and check as well. But basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out what would make this inside part give you the absolute value equal 5. So there's 2 sides of your number line, the negative and the positive. So you kind of want to find both solutions. All right, question 3 is one I pulled from Delta Math. So I kind of wanted to show you what you'll see more in there. But they're going to give you some extra junk. So your first goal is to isolate or get the absolute value part by itself. So we got to deal with this 4 and this negative 5. So it's kind of like when you're solving for a variable. If we're trying to solve for this absolute value, we want to get rid of this outside number first, so we would just subtract the 4. So I would have the -5 times the absolute value of 5x plus 2 equals -40. And like I said, don't distribute, because you can't distribute into an absolute value bar that's only for parentheses. So to get rid of this -5, you would divide. And -40 divided by -5 would be -8, or sorry, +8, because double negative. So now we're ready to split our equation. So we would have 5x plus 2 equals 8. We would have 5x plus 2 equals -8. Take a second, solve these equations, pick the two answers that are correct from the choices given in this question. All right, so if you work those out, you should have got 5x equals 6. Divide that, you're going to get a fraction answer, which happens quite a bit with absolute value equations. It's very rare, once the problems are made, that you get two nice answers all the time. So if you get a fraction or a decimal, don't freak out. You're probably on the right track. But make sure when you put them in Delta Math, usually, I think if it's a nice decimal, you can put in the decimal, but if it's like a repeated decimal, I think they'll mark you wrong. So it's not a bad idea to keep your fractions. Sorry, I realized that was off screen, but those are those two answers. Hopefully that wasn't too bad. I do apologize. All right, but sometimes with absolute value equations, things can get a little bit strange. If you're not careful, or if you don't check for them, you can get something called an extraneous solution. Basically, an extraneous solution is like a false positive, or it's a solution that's not really one of your answers. Like if you plug it back in, you'll see it's not true. This only happens if you have an absolute value equal something with an x on the right side. So basically, if you have x's on both sides of your absolute value equation, you want to be really careful, because that's where you can get these false positives. That's why for the previous questions we've done, I haven't been checking all my solutions, because I haven't had a case like this. So when you get into the Delta Math, the level 2 section, you're really going to want to plug in your answers, because we're going to see in this example even that you can get false positives. So for example, question 1, the absolute value is already isolated. So we're ready to split up our equation. So we would have 2x minus 6 equals 4x. We would have 2x minus 6 equals -4x. So we just need to do a little bit of solving. So I would subtract this 2x. I'd get -6 equals 2x. Divide the 2. You'll get x equals -3. Same process here. I'll just move all the x's to the right side, I guess. So you'd have -6 equals -6x. Divide that -6. You'll get 1 equals x. But for these, like I said, if you have x's on both sides of your absolute value equation, you want to plug these in, because it's very possible that 1, none, or even some of them could be false, or they both could work, but you need to check them. So like, for example, I'm going to plug in -3, and you want to plug it into the very original equation. So for example, if I plug in -3, let's see what we get. So my question is, do I get the same thing on both sides of my equation? So this would be -6 minus 6. This would be 4 times -3. So that would be the absolute value of -12. That would be -12. Is the absolute value of -12 equal to -12? No, it is not. Because remember, that would be 12. So this is not true. So we're going to eliminate this answer. It's not a true solution. It would be extraneous. Let's check the other one. So we're going to plug 1 into my equation. So I would have 2 times +1, sorry. -6 equals 4 times 1. The question is, are these the same? So if we work this out, this would be 2 minus 6. This would be 4. So we would have the absolute value -4 equals 4. That is true. So this is our true solution. So in delta math, you would simply put just the answer of 1. You don't list your extraneous solutions because, like we said, they are not true solutions to the question you're looking at.